Hi, I'm David McGriff, and I'm a sports entertainment lawyer based in Los Angeles. I specialize in NIL and protecting student athletes' rights in their name, image, and likeness. And welcome to the first episode of my new podcast, NIL Active. This podcast is kind of an extension of the videos that I've made over the last 7 or 8 months, where I've talked about different NIL issues. I've talked about trends in the market. I've talked about the legal issues, the business side, some of the things the student athletes need to look out for when they're executing these deals or when they're actually performing on the deal. Just a lot of different ways in which the NIL marketplace affects students and also the brand partners that hire the students to participate in NIL. So I wanted this platform to kind of give even more of an opportunity to educate folks and provide an opportunity for folks to, email me with questions that I could answer during the podcast. Because I hear from student athletes all over the country that then they have a similar theme, and that is that they don't have a lot of guidance in what NIL can offer them, how they could take advantage of the opportunity. I talked to someone just today who expressed that the university that the respective university I was involved wasn't preventing them from obtaining NIL deals, but they really weren't providing a lot of guidance either. And I hear that same comment a lot from different student athletes around the country. So this podcast hopefully can provide some information, provide some guidance to folks. And that's the purpose of the podcast. So the first thing I wanted to talk about on this first episode is, why do we need NIL? Why do we need this NIL policy? Is it something special that only student athletes get? Is it just another benefit, another perk, and they already getting their education paid for? So this is something on top of that? Well, the answer is no. It's not anything extra. It's not a benefit that other folks don't get. It's not an extra perk. And in fact, it's something that was necessary to give the athletes back a right that had been taken from them by the NCAA. Years ago, the NCAA said to maintain your amateur status, it's not just the fact that you couldn't perform or compete in the respective sport and earn money from it. So you couldn't participate in a basketball league and get paid to play basketball. You would thereby give up your amateur rights, and you couldn't play in college sports. You couldn't play D1 or any of the other divisions of college athletics. And so that made sense. That's kind of like, if you want to be an amateur, you can't get paid to play your sport. That makes sense. But they went beyond that, and they said you also can't earn any compensation based on your name, image, and likeness. That also would cause you to violate your amateur status. And I came across this issue first years ago practicing law. This young gentleman was a client, and he was a talented guy, singer, songwriter, dancer, charismatic young gentleman. And he was approached by one of the networks for a reality show to follow him and his family around as one of the typical family reality shows, family-based reality show. And the only issue was that he was, on top of his talents in the arts, he was a high-level basketball player. And so the issue came up of, if he participates in this reality show, if he earns compensation during this reality show, would that affect his amateur status as a basketball player later on if he sought to get a D1 scholarship? And the answer to that, unfortunately, was yes. He was compromising his amateur status, potentially by participating in the show. So I was contacted the NCAA, went back and forth with our compliance department. I was seeking an exemption to the general rule that would prohibit him from earning any compensation on the show. And through a lot of back and forth, there was months and months of correspondence and phone calls and negotiations. And I won't divulge how it reached a resolution, but I tell the story to say that was a real life situation that I encountered as an entertainment lawyer advocating on behalf of my client. And it was then that I decided that this was something that I was going to push for in the future. And of course, if it was ever, if student athletes ever had the opportunity to monetize their name, image, and likeness, I would definitely be there to provide assistance and guidance and legal counsel. So that was my first entree into the NIL world. And since then, I've been executing deals since last July when the ban was lifted. I've executed a lot of deals, and I'm happy to say that now I can directly help student athletes monetize their name, image, and likeness. So just setting that straight, it's not anything extra. I was someone on social media reached out to me and said, "Well, if athletes are getting NIL policy, then why aren't you know uh, people who are extraordinary in the sciences and math, STEM students?" And I said, well, the NIL policy is not necessary for them because they were never banned from monetizing their name, image, and likeness. So that's something that I think a lot of people don't quite understand, and hopefully that clears that up. And that brings me to the next point I wanted to cover in my first episode of NIL Active, and that is, what is the difference between pay for play and NIL? So pay for play is what it sounds like. You're getting paid to play your respective sport. And so there's a trend going that's building about actually passing laws which enable student athletes to participate in revenue sharing for the revenues generated by their respective sports. That's something that's not present. It's not happened yet. It's something that may happen in the future, but that is something that's not happened yet, and it's much different from NIL. NIL is a separate relationship between a student athlete and a third party, a brand, a company that's interested in interacting with the student athlete and engaging them to be a sponsor or to provide some sort of service to them that they think that they'll benefit from as a business. So it's separate and apart really from their participation in sports. Yes, they're athletes. They are athletes, and they may be sponsors for athletic wear or training equipment and things of that nature because they are athletes, and it makes sense. It's a nice natural synergy. But say, for example, there's been talk about football players and quarterbacks who enter into pretty large, lucrative NIL deals. Well, say that quarterback now has this large NIL deal and it's made public, it's announced publicly, so everybody knows about it. And then they go out and have a bad game, or they throw a bad interception, or they have a series of bad games. Should that fan base then look at the NIL deal that he has and throw that in his face and say, well, see, this is why he shouldn't have that big NIL deal, because he's out there, not performing? Well, my position on that is no, they shouldn't merge the two. They shouldn't conflate the two concepts of NIL and pay for play. As long as the student athletes performing under the contract, under the NIL contract, they showed up for the personal experience, personal appearance. They signed the autographs that they were obligated to sign. They showed up and took the pictures so that the deal that was contemplated, they actually fulfilled their obligation. Then nothing should be said, because as long as the NIL contract is fulfilled, that student athlete's participation in the NIL deal has been fulfilled. And so what he or she does on the court or on the field or on the diamond shouldn't really matter. Now, I know the reality, the real world is different from the ideal world. And there's going to be people that talk bad about student athletes and bring up their NIL deals as something to denigrate them and say that they're not worth the money. That's just a fact of life, unfortunately, and it's something that student athletes. It's one of the downsides of NIL. I think if that is a trend and that continues to happen, or it begins to happen, I think that's one of the downsides of NIL. There's a lot of positives in NIL, right? There's first, the right off the bat, they're making some money. It's ranging from a few $100s to millions. But anything for a student athlete can be helpful. It can be an extra meal. It can, you know, provide them time to go see a movie or something like that. Um, but it also is they're going to have to manage. They're going to have to juggle their already busy schedule of practice, working out, going to class, and now their NIL obligations. Now that they sign up for a bunch of NIL obligations, well, that's on that particular student athlete, right? But it is something that they have to contend with and have to deal with, and it could be a negative if they stretch themselves too thin. That's something that I'll talk about probably in the future. Is student athletes need to be mindful that they don't want to stretch themselves too thin on NIL and jump at every single deal, especially if those deals have a lot of obligations per deal. Showing up to one appearance, that's one thing. That's, it's a locked in, it's 1 day or 2 days where they have to show up at an event, shake some hands and smile for some folks and take some pictures. That's pretty manageable. But if they've signed up for 10 or 15 deals where they have to make 3 or 4 posts per week on each deal, that could get overwhelming for a student athlete that's already stretched, already kind of burning the candle at both ends. So that's something to be mindful of. That would be a downside if they could stretch themselves too thin. And then coming back to what I said earlier, getting criticized for signing a lucrative NIL deal and then not performing on the court or on the field, that could be another downside. And it's kind of the reality of life. So student athletes need to balance that and be prepared as much as they can for people who are just not too kind, or the folks that put the fanatic in the they're not just fans, but they're fanatics. And there's some of those in college football, particularly. And we all know that certain fan bases are more rabid than others. And so, it's particularly student athletes that play for those schools, that's something that they would want to be mindful of. Me personally, I don't think adults should be coming down hard on student athletes for performance in general. Now, I know there's gambling on these games and things of that nature. So again, the reality is there's going to be some criticism, but it would be unfortunate if NIL, which is was designed to be a good thing, designed to again restore rights to student athletes that had been taken from them, designed to help put money in their pockets. It also helps them kind of grow up a bit in terms of engaging with real world people, with business folks, learning the terms of negotiations, how to negotiate things, what it means to get a royalty, what it means to get back end compensation, and then some of them having to, depending on how much money they're making, having to deal with the tax implications of earning that income. Those are all things that help them grow up, help them become adults, help them get into the real world, even though they're still in college. Those are all positives. And I would hate for any kind of extra negative energy expended towards these young folks who are 19, 20, 21, because they happen to take advantage of NIL and then they don't wind up performing well. That would be really unfortunate if folks use that scenario, that dynamic, as something negative to kind of pile on these student athletes. That's my opinion on that subject of NIL deals, and that they're separate from performance, and overall why we should try to keep the concepts of pay for play and NIL separate in our heads. I think that would help. If we kept it separate, that would help at least decrease the possibility of people piling on student athletes because they're not performing what they think to the level they think they should, because they signed this big NIL deal. So that's what I got to say on that topic. I also wanted to discuss a deal or a situation that was just announced this morning. And it involves the Pac-12, and it involves Open Doors and Twitter. Now, Open Doors, for those that don't know, is a heavy player in the NIL industry. They provide data. They provide information on deals that have done. They provide valuations on 12,000 student athletes to give both student athletes and brands an idea of how much each student athlete is worth in any particular NIL deal. And they use that data. They come up with these numbers based on their reach on social media, their region that they play in, the school they play for, their visibility. How many games are they playing on national television? Things of that nature, what market that they're in, that kind of stuff. That all goes into how marketable a student athlete is. So what was announced today was that Open Doors and Twitter are joining forces to provide a way for Pac-12 football players to monetize their NIL. Those football players will be able to share their personal video highlights on Twitter post-game and receive income for their performance on the field. So this is something that's a great extension of NIL. I've heard student athletes for years that they wish they were able just to post their highlights, because sometimes they go viral, and it'd be nice if I got paid for that. That one-handed catch I made, or that the nice throw that I had, or the big hit that I laid on somebody. Well, the Pac-12 now you can, and the Pac-12 was able to come up with a way in which I'm assuming, I can't really tell directly from the article, because the first thing I thought of as a lawyer is, okay, so are they going to get trademark licenses from each of the member schools? Are they going to go to Oregon? Because now the USC and now the SC and UCLA have left the Pac-12. Oregon is the biggest name, or the biggest trademark probably left in the Pac-12. So are they going to Oregon? They're going to the other schools, Stanford, Cal, Colorado, Utah, so forth, and getting trademark licenses from each of them to enable them to post their post-game highlights. Apparently, the Pac-12 has worked something out to make that, to facilitate that. So it doesn't seem like there's going to be trademark issues. We'll see how that all plays out, but at least just from reading this article that On3 NIL published today, it appears to me that the Pac-12 is allowing this to happen. And so the players don't have to go back and get any kind of extra approval or an extra license from their respective school in order to post their video on Twitter and monetize it. And this is great. It's a first of its kind product. There's never been a program like that at any level of sports, even at the pro level. And the commissioner according to the article, the commissioner of the Pac-12 is a person that was really heavily involved with getting it done. The CEO of Open Doors, Blake Lawrence, he told On3 that athletes monetizing video highlights on Twitter is something we've had conversations about with Twitter for years. Before NIL, this is something we discussed. What would it take for athletes to monetize their own highlights on Twitter? So apparently they've figured it out, at least with respect to Pac-12. So Pac-12 football, that's it for now. So one of the Power 5 conferences, Pac-12, and then just one of the sports within Pac-12 so far is going to be able to take advantage of this deal between Twitter and Open Doors, or amongst Twitter, Open Doors, and Pac-12. So I suspect that the other conferences will quickly jump on this. Big 10, Big 12, SEC, ACC. For now, I mean, there's probably going to be conference realignment and consolidation, all that kind of stuff. But right now, there's the Power 5, and I expect at least one of the remaining Power 5 to announce something like this relatively quickly, because this is something that I think it's appealing to student athletes, and I don't know if it moves the needle to so much to where an athlete would pick Oregon over Ohio State because they're able to monetize their Twitter. But it is something that if if a player is getting recruited, it might be something that they think about. That, well, if I go to the Pac-12, at least I can make some money off of Twitter. And the Pac-12, I think it's important for the Pac-12 to stay aggressive as long as they are a separate conference. I think it's important for the Pac-12 to stay aggressive in in NIL measures and other measures. I think they being aggressive on getting another media rights deal that that pays a little more money would be helpful to the Pac-12 to keep their member schools and to keep them as a viable conference. It's going to be interesting to see what they do. But this was a good start. This was a good day for the Pac-12 to announce this this deal with Open Doors and Twitter. So that's the first episode of NIL Active. If you have questions that you want me to answer during the podcast, make sure you email me. You can email me at david@thenillawyer.com. You can follow me on Instagram at the NIL Lawyer, and you can also DM me there if you have questions. But this is something that I want this podcast to grow, and I want it to be interactive with student athletes and brand partners, and anyone really within the NIL community, so that we can all help each other to stay on top of the trends and help the student athletes monetize their NIL and really capitalize on this opportunity that they've been given. Thanks for watching.